that we.
Okay, looks to me like we are on.
Okay.
So I'm going to go back to actually
No,
can
do it now anyway.
minimize this. Got it. Hopefully it's going to both places, and we'll see who else joins us on this last session and earlier time.
Oh, we may be missing Ben and Adrian because it's Adrian's birthday today.
Ah, right. Okay. Even though they're on island and the time didn't change for them.
Don't.
So happy birthday, Adrian.
Oh, I think everyone's got the time wrong.
We will see if a lot of people come in an hour.
People are endlessly confused by this. I explain it.
Well,
So-
I mean, if only, here comes Katina, if only, you know, I don't, you know, I don't like being an hour ahead of the East Coast, but, you know, people on the East Coast certainly are not generally aware that we don't change. So, Katina's taking a little.
Arizona and Hawaii don't change either.
Right. There we go. Here comes Katina. So it is 7 o'clock. I will pull up the presentation. Here comes Peter. He's the one who asked me 2 days ago. Admit all. Oh, okay.
That's what usually is done.
Okay. That
That's the cookies there.
No, so there's. Oh,
yeah, the cookies are loud tonight.
Wow.
One shot. Welcome everybody to our final class of this Foundations for a Thoughtful Judaism, this 6-week session. Let's recite the bracha together. Wait, let me admit the 2 people who just came in. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, ever present, our God, sovereign of all time and space, who brings holiness to our lives through the mitzvah of living out words of Torah. So we began with 2 weeks on the concept of peoplehood, both being and becoming, and then different aspects of Jewish identity. We continued with 2 weeks of introduction to the concept of faith and different ways of framing either the journey of Abraham or the ways in which people relate to the concept of faith. Last week, we took one dive into the concept of practice with an exploration of mitzvah, the idea of commandment and of choice. Today, we tackle 2 different classes. I've smushed them together from the ethics curriculum. The reason I did both classes will be obvious because they are 2 sides of the same coin, but it means we have a lot of ground to cover tonight. The ethics volume brings into focus Jewish conversations about ethical questions that impact all of us. What do I owe my inner circle? What do I owe everyone? How do I maintain relationships with integrity when people wrong one another? How should I balance competing values when making a decision? And that, by the way, if I don't come back to it myself, remind me to give you as an example abortion in Judaism and Catholicism as simply a reflection of different kinds of ethical decision making, not like right or wrong, but of different ways of weighing competing values. What are the obligations of parents to children and vice versa? The first unit, we're going to take the first 2 classes, class 1 and class 2, from a dual system of ethics, creation ethics and covenantal ethics. That is the essence of what we are talking about tonight, the difference between those 2. Unit 2 is interpersonal ethics, the well-known philosophical question of the bystander effect, the ethics of repute, of sacrifice, of building community. Unit 3 is about how we make moral choices, and Unit 4 is about the practice of making moral choices. The podcasts for the ethics volume, there are 3 of them. I have already sent you the links in the PDF, which I distributed yesterday. So those are functioning links in the PDF. What makes Jewish ethics Jewish, which again, remind me to come back to that question if we have time for it. So abortion, and also what's Jewish about Jewish ethics? How do we negotiate competing obligations? And can Torah make people more ethical, which is a fascinating question, I think. Here is a summary of that. And I am a little surprised that Rabbi Dr. Daniel Hartman did not tackle Can Torah Make People More Ethical in the podcast, since his book, Putting God Second, really deals with this. If you have not studied with Christine Hayes, who is in the podcast, How Do We Negotiate Competing Obligations, is what that should say. There's actually a typo there in their material. I highly recommend. Christine Hayes is one of the leading non-Jewish Talmud teachers in North America, or indeed in the world, and I have studied with her many times. She teaches at Yale. She's a friend of my sister-in-law and brother-in-law. She is phenomenally good and very interesting. Unit 1 of the 2 we are, well, this is the overall unit, first unit. Life is full of decision-making that relates to balancing our ethical obligations to different groups. For instance, where should I donate the bulk of my time, money, and energies? To causes within my community or to causes that affect others? How do you define community? What is your community? And why? What happens when my responsibilities to others and to my own community come into conflict? That could never happen, right? What happens if I cannot fulfill both simply due to finite resources? How can we navigate between universal and communal obligations and commitments? That is what we are going to go into now. Most of us try to do the right thing most of the time, but in the real world, we often operate under less than ideal circumstances. This could be because of limited time or resources, but it also could be because different ethical choices are actually in competition with one another. The purpose of the ethics volume is to provide frameworks found within Jewish wisdom for understanding ethical obligations, both better language to frame the ethical dilemmas we face in our real lives, and to help us become more intentional about ethical choices in the future. In the first unit, there's the big, bold argument, which is that Judaism actually has 2 different ethical systems. The Hartman people are calling one of them creation ethics and the other covenant ethics. I am combining both of these classes. Creation ethics is a system which you are likely already familiar with. This is a system in which we imagine that all people are treated equally. Well, what's going to be the contrast to that?
It's the second, the covenant ethics.
Yeah.
Well, yes, in which people are not all treated equally. That is, covenant ethics is the idea, and it may be less familiar, but it's the notion that you owe more to an internal group shared because they are members of your own collective. And so we will play those out shortly. In Western ethics, we often talk about rights that are universal to all of humanity versus rights that depend on whether you live in the United States and don't move to Puerto Rico. Oh, no, sorry, that was today's Supreme Court case. And rights that are prerogative of members of certain groups. There is a strong parallel in Jewish ethics. The Torah introduces a dual system of ethical obligations. One system stipulates obligations that we owe all human beings equally, and the other, obligations you owe to members of one particular community. And you've seen the terms that they're using for these: creation ethics and covenant ethics. The creation ethics class has 4 texts. In the first text, you see the assertion, which you would probably have started with yourself, that all humanity was created in God's image. The second describes how creation of humanity in the divine image imposes, there are implications of that, right? The third suggests these obligations may stretch beyond a minimum of do no harm. And the fourth complicates this in the real world. So let's look. What do you think? First of all, what is this a picture of?
It's
This
the
is a
good
re-
place.
Yes, this is a recent TV show called The Good Place. If you have not watched The Good Place from beginning to end, I highly recommend that you do so. It is a
I've seen
fantastic.
every episode.
What?
I've seen every episode.
It is a fantastic show. I'm not going to go into more details because we have so much to cover tonight. But I'm glad some of you recognized it. What do you think you owe other people? And can you think of an ethical requirement which you owe all obligations equally? Anyone?
I think,
People fair-
go ahead.
To treat people fairly.
Okay, to treat people fairly.
Yeah, the golden rule, or don't do unto others as you wouldn't have them do to you, at least.
Right, that's the Jewish version of it. Yes, that's right. I can easily think of situations in which that puts itself at conflict with itself, though. So we will sharpen that shortly. Who would like to start with the obvious choice for text number 1 from Genesis chapter 1?
I can do it.
Jennifer, it's yours.
And God created the human being in God's own image. In the image of God did God create it. Male and female created God them. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and reign over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the heavens and over every beast crawling upon the earth.
So verse 28 has a particular charge in it. It does contrast a little bit with the charge in chapter 2 of Genesis, which is in Genesis 1, it's rule over and subdue, use the earth, master it, exploit it, if you will. And chapter 2 in the garden, it says your goal is to till it and to tend it. So those are two different things which we are not focused on tonight. The idea of God creating the human being in God's own image. What does that mean? And how are human beings like God?
I think that gets used by different people to mean different things. You know, some people use it to argue that certain people are not accepted or not following what they're supposed to. And other people use it to say, no, if God created a human being who, for instance, is non-binary, then that is the image of God, just like everybody else.
Right.
Those things seem to be in competition sometimes, depending on which religious person you happen to be talking to.
Here's my math from the Pride March.
What about soul? What about the soul of a human being? Does that have anything to do with God?
Well, say, how are human beings like God? Some people would say it is the soul. Very few people these days would say it's our physical bodies are how we are made in the image of God. But
So it's inside of us.
what other possibilities are there? How are human beings like God?
I think that human beings, we tend to think both of us have minds, are able to make certain decisions about what we want, what we don't want, things that are good and bad.
All right, so you have covered in your response just now, Kendra, consciousness and conscience, which are two different things. And I
Right.
think either or both could be meant by this. Consciousness and conscience. So let's leave it at that for now. The story of creation is about all humanity, not solely a narrative about the Jewish people. God creates all of humanity in the divine image. It's unclear from the text what about humanity resembles God, but it's clear that being created in the image of God is something important and present in all human beings. Human beings are the only creatures as described as created in the divine image. This gives human beings a unique connection to God at exactly the moment they're created. The Torah suggests that there are unique and universal human characteristics which stem from this special connection to God. In Jewish thought, the universal, inherent, unalienable, extremely high value of human life is rooted in the idea that all human beings are created in the divine image. This notion becomes the Jewish language for talking about the inherent value of all human life. That is why David Hartman of blessed memory referred to those Jewish ethical obligations owed to all human beings as creation ethics. Source number 2 plays this out in some of the moral implications. This is also a short one. Anyone want a short reading?
I can do it.
Go ahead.
And surely your blood of your lives will I require. From every beast will I require it. And from the human being, even from every person's fellow, will I require the life of the human being. One who sheds a person's blood, by human beings shall their blood be shed. For in the divine image did God make the human being.
Now, this implies capital punishment as a response for murder, but we are going to question that with our fourth text. This is also any other comments on this for the moment? The context of this passage is permission to kill animals and eat animal flesh. Interestingly enough, who was the first person to eat animals in Jewish tradition? Very ironic.
Noah.
Noah, that's right. I mean, I guess he was just fed up with being coked up with them, right? You know, when he got off, first thing he did, right? Now, does that mean he's going to cause extinction? Read the text very carefully. It says 1 pair of every unclean animal and 7 pair of every clean animal. Now, what does that mean? The problem is the laws of keeping kosher haven't been given yet. This is one part of the law of keeping kosher, by the way, is spilling the blood out. The idea that the blood libel, the idea that Jews use the blood of a Christian child to cook matzah with is so important. No people in the world has a distaste for blood as strong an aversion as Jews do. So the whole history of the blood libel, which began in the 1200s in England, is really a libel, as it were. But you know, the implications, interestingly enough, Adam, it says in Genesis, and Adam had known Eve, his wife. Now it says this after they're not in Eden anymore, which means that there was sex in paradise. But if they were vegetarians, then there were no, Jimmy Buffett, help me out here, there were no what?
Cheeseburgers in paradise.
That's correct. There were no cheeseburgers in paradise. Never mind the combination of milk and meat. So Noah is the first one, right? People may not kill each other. Provocatively, the punishment for killing is killing, which implies that killing human beings is bad, but potentially not wrong in all circumstances in the biblical worldview. Human life is inviolable. Any human being or animal who kills a person will be held accountable by God. This is the central implication of humanity being created in the divine image. It's morally wrong to kill people or harm people. What we owe all human beings universally is to refrain from killing or harming them. But we can extend that further, what we owe to each other. Let's quickly read from source 3.
Okay, I'll do that one. You shall not deliver to one's enslaver a slave who is saved from their enslaver with you. They shall dwell with you among you in the place where they shall choose within one of your dwelling places, where it is good for them. You shall not wrong them.
All right, we're going to come back to this. This is about a fugitive slave who comes to you and don't return them. This is a moral obligation that extends beyond just don't killing people, right? Like the statement in the Declaration of Independence about the inalienable rights endowed to people by their creator. The Bible describes responsibilities, not just not killing, but responsibilities owed to all human beings as related to God. Why should God be important in a discussion about ethics? Okay, let me push the point a little bit. What building is shown in this picture, Peter?
Oh, it's the Ethical Culture Society.
That's correct.
That's the one. Yeah, that's yeah. Oh, I went to school there. Yep, I recognize it.
Right. That is the world headquarters of the Society for Ethical Culture. An attempt to create an ethics that is based purely on humanism and without any idea of God. Any thoughts or reactions to this? Can we really require a sense of God for an ethical foundation in the first place?
So ethics are entirely different from morals. All right, God, you may be able to equate God with a moral act. All right, but ethics are supposedly rules that set in some sort of code or form that you can live by in your relationship with other human beings. I don't think it's based on any biblical interpretation.
Wow, so you're saying that morals is the strategy and ethics is the tactics.
Yeah.
Interesting. I've never heard that distinction in quite that way. That's really interesting.
Well, that comes from my legal background.
Right, that's right.
Frankly,
So
being
what,
moral, it has nothing to do with my ethics as a lawyer.
well, what would a universal ethic look like without God?
Maybe it would be less judgmental.
Well, that's interesting.
Well, people try to impose a lot of things on top of ethics based on their interpretations of the Bible, or whether it's the Christian or Hebrew Bible, or what they think they understand that God wants. But
So
if you
here's the $64 million question. Is that an inherent aspect of religion, in which case, if I believed that, I would not be in the field I was in because I would hate religion? Or is that an abuse of the idea of God? And it's a very, look, I know a lot of atheists who believe that the very idea of God leads to being judgmental. That is why Daniel Hartman's book was so provocative. An Orthodox trained rabbi writing a book called Putting God Second. Very, very interesting. So I have a great deal of respect and admiration for humanistic foundations of ethics which do not involve a concept of God at all. I have not personally, not speaking broadly, I have not really encountered one that tells me in a satisfactory way why the Nazis were wrong. We talked about this last week or before, I think. And what I mean by that is they're not wrong because they lost. They're not wrong because more people came to believe that they were wrong than not believe that they were wrong. I mean, ultimately wrong. To me, the idea of God, even if not the reality of God, the idea of God that we are all human beings are equal in that we are standing opposite and a reflection of something that goes beyond us, but that we share in that to me is a foundation of ethics and morality. Now, there are people who are atheists, or probably even religious people, who do not view God in that way. But to me, for me personally, I think that it speaks very clearly. The idea that all human beings are equal flows from the idea that we are all made in the image of God, even if I am very confused about what God is.
Why do some people use religion as a means to judge that people who who aren't members of the religion or don't believe in what they believe in are somehow not equal or not worthy of the same treatment, because I think that's the criticism you see. I'm not saying that that's something you would do or that anybody in this group would do, or that I think is a part of what is intended.
They
But
could
it
be
gets
caught up,
perverted.
they could be caught up in covenant ethics as opposed to creation ethics. They could have forgotten this foundational text and moved on to the second part of what we're doing tonight. Peter.
I was going to comment that there's an an underlying assumption in what you said, which is that the sense of God is the sense of something external to humans, so that somehow we can point at that, whether it's a proof text or a sense of God or whatever you want to say. We can point at that and say that is that. We take direction with it. That's our North Star. That we make reference to it. It's a reference point to us. If you say that,
I apologize for that partly, because I do believe that that source can be from within. But there is a problem with the source being from within. And the problem with the source being from within, although I equally believe that, I sometimes believe that God is a metaphor, and therefore totally have the sense of it flowing from within us. The problem is that if you assume that ethics are universal, either way, I guess, you will then assume that human beings will all come to the same conclusion about what the right thing to do is, no matter what group they're in, no matter what setting they're in. And the problem I have with that is clitoridectomies. The cultures that think that it is ethical and moral to cut off a baby girl's clitoris. Right? And I just don't think that when we talk about, in the 19th century, people believed in progress and the idea of modernism, and that if everybody applied their brains in the same way, they would come to the same ethical conclusions. I just don't think that's true. I think that cultures are sufficiently different that there are vastly different things that some cultures would consider terribly unethical that are central parts of other cultures. So
About the binding of feet. Remember when they
binding, yep. So, you know, we can talk about ethical understanding and evolving over time. But Peter, you're right. I misspoke if I implied that it was only outside. You know,
well,
and I.
No, I don't mean to beat a dead horse. I don't mean to. I'm not saying it's outside of it's outside of each of us. We have to very much internalize. I'm saying that this sense of God implies that there is a God who is external to us. That if you're going to say there's an absolute right and wrong, we're going to use God as the way of pointing at it, then it doesn't grow from humans. So essentially, it requires, I think, a belief in God, which is fine. But I think it requires that. If you say that God is a metaphor, the Torah was written by people, then why isn't it just a different form of secular humanism?
Well,
I'm being provocative purposely.
Yeah, and I'm not. I have a whole second class to get through tonight, so I'll leave that question out there. The quick answer is I am reminded of, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, the movie Powers of 10, and the inner workings of the DNA and the outer workings of the universe. I believe that when you look inside, including in your own group, in your own community, or inside yourself, or if you start out looking at outside, ultimately you will come to a circle and come to the same place. I believe that spirituality of looking inward and social justice of reaching outward come to the same place. But I'm ducking your question on purpose.
Fair enough.
What is this?
But the example that you brought up, I know we're leaving this, but I'll be quick. The example that you brought up is just an example of society subjugating and controlling women, which exists in multiple societies, whether they believe in some form of God or don't. So it's kind of a broader and different question.
Well, so you could attribute it to the growing understanding a growing ethical understanding over time, we hope, although we know it's not. In the 19th century, they thought it was a straight line of progress moving ever upward and forward, but we know that that's not the case, having witnessed the horrors of the 20th century. Here comes Rachel. What is this that we are looking at? Anybody? This is an artistic depiction of an ancient, possibly fictional, but probably real Jewish institution.
Sanhedrin?
This is an artistic depiction of the Sanhedrin, the great place where cases were judged. So here from Mishnah Sanhedrin, chapter 4, section 5, who would like to read this? All right, I'll go on. Who would like to read this? And once I have a volunteer, I'll give you a little background.
I'll read it.
Okay, so Toby, before you start, Sanhedrin is about the rules and procedures of the court. And so they divide between Dinei Mamonot, civil cases, literally cases involving money, and Dinei Nefashot, cases involving souls or capital cases. And famously, despite the fact that the Torah says time and time and time again, if you do this, you shall be put to death. Famously, Mishnah Sanhedrin and then the Talmud, the Gemara on Mishnah Sanhedrin does pages and pages and pages and pages of limitations on the application of capital punishment, so much so that it is easy to say that they probably made capital punishment impossible to carry out. Now, why didn't they just say, we don't believe in capital punishment? The rabbis of the Talmud, why didn't they say that?
Because there's too much in there to counter that.
One, there's too much in there to counter that. And two, the foundational notion of rabbinic Judaism is that the Torah is the literal word of God. But what is the rabbi's role? They take that literal word of God and they
Interpret it.
Interpret it. And by interpretation, right? By interpretation, they change how it is viewed. So they can't come out and say the Torah is wrong, but okay, so go ahead, Toby, go ahead for reading this section.
How did they admonish witnesses in capital cases? They brought them in and admonished them, saying, perhaps you will say something that is only a supposition or hearsay or secondhand or even from a trustworthy person. Or perhaps you do not know that we shall check you with examination and inquiry. No, moreover, the capital cases are not like monetary cases. In monetary cases, a person may pay money and so make atonement, but in capital cases, the witness is answerable for the blood of who is wrongfully condemned and the blood of their would-be descendants in the end of the world. For so we have found it with Cain that murdered his brother, for it says, the blood of your brother cry out. It doesn't say the blood of your brother, but rather the bloods of your brother, meaning his blood and the blood of his descendants. Another saying is the bloods of your brother, that his blood was cast over trees and stones. Therefore, humanity was created in the world first as an individual to teach that if any person has caused a single life to perish from Israel, they are deemed by scripture as if they had caused a whole world to perish. And anyone who saves a single soul from Israel, they are deemed by scripture as if they had saved a whole world again.
Let me interrupt you. I believe that the parentheses is because there are some manuscripts that have the phrase from Israel and some do not, which is a fascinating difference here, but keep going.
Again, but a single person was created for the sake of peace among humankind, that one should not say to one another, my father was greater than your father. Another reason why humanity was created as an individual is to challenge the heretics so they should not say, there are many ruling powers in heaven. Another reason why humanity was created as an individual is to proclaim the greatness of the Holy Blessed One. For humans stamp many coins with one seal, and they are all like one another. But the Holy Blessed One, sovereign of sovereigns, has stamped every human with the seal of the first human being, yet not one of them resemble the other exactly.
I love that.
And if perhaps you, the witnesses would say, why should we be involved with this trouble? Was it not said, they, being a witness, whether they have seen or known, if they do not speak it, they shall not bear their iniquity.
They shall bear.
They shall bear, sorry, their iniquity. And if perhaps you, the witnesses, would say, why should we be responsible for the blood of this person? Was it not said, when the wicked perish, there is rejoicing?
Okay, there's a lot in here. Some great imagery here. I love the imagery of the stamp. Why one human being? So you can't say, my family was better than yours, right? We all come from one human being. Why else? To say that, you know, we're all this is, any other comments on this? This is an amazing passage from Sanhedrin. And the Gemara, the Talmud about, and you realize how I'm using the term Talmud, right? The the Talmud is the Mishnah and the Gemara, which comments on the Mishnah. Together, those two make up the Talmud. So I just used the term Gemara and Talmud interchangeably, because the Gemara is the commentary on the Mishnah, but you obviously can't have the Gemara without the Mishnah that it's commenting on. So the word Gemara, I also used the word Talmud. The Talmud, or the Gemara, on this goes into pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of the procedure, that all of them have the effect of narrowing capital punishment to the fact of making it nearly impossible to carry out. So it's a
Unless you live in Texas.
What?
Unless you live in Texas.
Yeah, yes, unless you live in Texas, right?
I think there are some other states as well.
How do our ideas and ideas of ethical obligations change over time?
Well, it changed with circumstances. New situations arise that come from advances in technology, communications, interactions between nations, blurring of national boundaries.
All right, so I'll give you one technological example. There's a story in the Talmud about a wood chopper and a dying patient, and the dying patient is tossing and turning, and the wood chopper is outside doing construction work, and they go and give him $5 and say, go into town and get a beer to quiet him down. I'm making this more contemporary, and so it's quiet, and then the person dies. Is a wood chopper equivalent to a respirator? Right? How does that work? So technology, and the question of, we have the category of, from ancient texts, of the question of what is a peaceful death, what is a natural death? How do things like modern technology fit into that is a very interesting question for Jewish bioethics now. So that's one way in which ethical obligations change over time. I would say we have an expanding understanding of ethical obligations, and that things like we're fighting over in this country right now. What does it mean to be aware of our biases? Is it woke? Is woke a good thing or a bad thing, right? Looking inside, how much should we do it? Or should we just say, something that I shouldn't say as a rabbi while I'm broadcasting, to the people who are asking us to look inside at the way that we've had an impact on others. How do these things, we say, be a good person. That's nice. We can all agree on that. The question is implementing it, right? Things get complicated in real life. So I'm going to take a tangent here and give you two examples of ethical situations in which people have reacted to the same problem in different ways based on their own background and experience. Now, this is not Hartman stuff. This is my own personal experience on both of these. Well, one of them is not my own personal experience, but both of them relate to the Winkelsteins, because they're like One of them is about Buffalo and the other is about Catholicism. So let's, and this doesn't even touch on the abortion question. A number of years ago, when I was the vice chair of the Network of Religious Ministries or something like that, whatever it was called in Buffalo, and the chair was an African-American Baptist minister named Jeff Carter. And there were flyers that were distributed by a group that said, let's come together in City Hall for prayers focusing on what unite all of us as Western New Yorkers. And what do you think it was that they said that united all of us as Western New Yorkers?
The Bills?
Our faith in our Lord Jesus Christ as our Redeemer and Savior. Right? It was not the Bills.
Well, but
it should have been the Bills. That would have been less controversial.
Yes, that was my point.
We were there until 11:30 at night, debating with Muslims, Protestants, white Protestants, Black Protestants, Catholics, the Baha'i community, and Buddhists, a resolution that opposed this flyer. And it passed, and then Jeff Carter said, I now submit my resignation as the president of this group. And we said, what? Huh? Why didn't you say that earlier? So here is the thing. It turns out, I had never thought about this before. Jews came to this country for freedom from religion. What do I mean by that?
Freedom to worship in any way they chose.
Or to escape from an Orthodox monopoly. Either one, but it also could have been freedom from forced conversion. In Russia, that was going on. Freedom from disputations in which we had to prove that Judaism was superior to Christianity and rigged debates, which we almost never won. We actually
freedom from pogrom.
Right? Freedom from pogroms. To us, however we wanted to behave religiously, many Jews came to this country for freedom from religion. Let's look at the African-American experience. The African-American experience of America was that Sunday morning was their only what?
Free time.
It was their only moment of freedom at all. The only freedom they found at all was in religion.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, to an African-American, nobody is going to tell him when and how he can pray. And so this is the same situation, our encounter with America, but different groups had very different reactions to the same thing, both ethical, but very different perspectives. Here's another example. Also American civic space. The second example is that at some point in the late 1800s, Jews and Catholics encountered the exact same thing. They encountered historically Protestant control of public schools. Did you know, by the way, that one of the only pogroms in this country in its history was against Catholics in Philadelphia in the early 1830s, I think, when all of a sudden the school banned or they required the use of the King James Bible, which is not the Catholic translation, and therefore, and Catholics were afraid, and the diocese told people stay away from church and stay home on a particular Sunday. Catholics and Jews encountered Protestant control of the public schools. Jews reacted to this how?
I would say, but I already know this story, so I won't.
Made their own
Well,
school.
it's your profession, Kendra, but it's not
They became
it's
educated.
not your confession, as it were. Right? We hired lawyers and we
Audit.
went to court to equalize the treatment in a country that promises no establishment of a state institution of religion, right? What did Catholics do?
Run away, run away.
They
They
formed their own-
established an alternative school. They established an alternative school system. This is a different reaction to the same impetus. And that just as a way of showing that ethics can be complicated. To review the four texts we looked at, the first one, Genesis 1, was an egalitarian understanding of humanity. The second one, Genesis 9, a basic and universal standard of please don't kill each other, right? The third text raises the bar of what is ethically required. We actually have to help each other. And the fourth text pushes us to think about how you actualize this in public policy, how it plays out, how you're gonna apply these ideals. The Bible introduces a dual system of ethical obligations, one system that focuses on the obligations that one owes all human beings equally, and the other one, which we'll look at soon, that owes members of one's particular community. Creation ethics is rooted in the idea that each human being is created in the divine image. The obligations entailed in creation ethics are basic. They are about refraining from physical harm and/or harm to human dignity. We now reach class number 2. I am rushing. The Bible also parallels Western ethics in establishing the obligations of the individual to their community, what we call covenant ethics. Covenant ethics consists of a wider scope of actions that we owe to those who are either related to us or live with us. For many, creation ethics will be very familiar. This next step is a second, less familiar, but probably not alien concept. Ethical obligations which result from the sharing of a particular covenant. Covenant ethics forges us into a particular people and leads to obligations to others within our particular group. A covenant ethics can refer to a set of ethics which heightens obligation based on proximity or other factors. There are 5 texts we will look at. Carol Gilligan, ways in which members of a society have an impact on each other. And that is a feminist perspective, which is welcome here. We are not just automatons separated from each other. We are connected. Bava Metzia, the Talmud, this part of the Talmud prioritizes members of one's own community in a text which you may find disturbing. Deuteronomy 15 and 19, there's a higher ethical floor depending on who you are. Exodus 23 problematizes this notion with the idea of what you owe your enemy. But the question is, who is your enemy? And we'll come to that in a minute. Okay, are there hierarchies of this should be an easy question, but its implications are uncomfortable. Are there hierarchies of obligations which you already follow?
Sure.
Yeah,
So?
I mean, people feel more of an obligation to help out people that they're related to or live with monetarily, emotionally, whatever, than they do to have obligations to strangers, which are more in a general sense, like maybe donations or something. So I think everybody has that sort of focus in their life.
By the way, what is one of the definitions of home?
The place that when you go there, they can't throw you away, throw you out.
Right. Home is the place where they have to take you in.
Right. That's Thomas. I think it's Thomas Wolfe.
I didn't know that, but he tried going home again, right? Who are the people to whom you feel the greatest level of obligation? What generates this sense of obligation? So one of you said family. What else?
A need to protect.
How did the early church try to grab this idea? What are the religious clergy and religious people in Catholicism called?
Priest.
Yeah. More
Father,
specific.
father, mother,
Brother, sister.
mother,
Do you think Mother Superior?
mother superior.
Do you think that that is an accident? They were trying to transfer the idea of family and an obligation to one another to being based on shared belief. And they did it with those titles. In the early days of the Christian church, there were little Christian communities in different places. And you would go to that community and they would take you in and they would feed you. Much as today, if I'm in a, look, this doesn't apply to St. Thomas. I wish it did. Partly it's because we know people here don't do Shabbat dinners in their homes. You know, if you're going to a synagogue and you go to services on a Friday night, in certain places, if I'm traveling, let's put it this way. Talia and I went to Kol Hanshama when I was accompanying our high school, the high school she went to, our high school trip to Israel to the Weizmann Institute. And for Shabbat, we spent it in Jerusalem, but all the other kids on the trip were not Jewish, so they had no interest in Shabbat. So they did whatever they were going to do. But I went to Shabbat services at Kol Hanshama on Friday. And they had dinner scheduled somewhere else. And I said, look, there's a 10% chance that Talia and I will meet you for dinner. And they said, what do you mean? So what happens? I went to Kol Hanshama, and what happened?
You got invited to someone's house for dinner.
Of course I did. Right? Of course I did. Right? So that's, you know, no further comment necessary. Let's move on from here with an interesting diversion into in early church history. So, Carol Gilligan is the author of In a Different Voice, Psychological Theory and Women's Development, a groundbreaking work of psychology and educational theory. You will see why she is a feminist thinker here. She also is the one who wrote a book called You Just Don't Understand, about how men and women speak differently and are heard by each other differently. But who wants to read this terrific selection?
I'll read.
Okay, Kathy.
We have to move this thing out of the way a little bit. Our lives are embedded in a network of relationships. As humans, we are independent. It's the understanding interdependent, sorry, completely different. It's the understanding of the human condition that Martin Luther King articulates in his letter from the Birmingham jail. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. From this vantage point, the parameters of judgment and action shift. I have written at length about this paradigm shift, explaining that it does not mean choosing relationships over self or caring over justice. Instead, it signifies a change in the question. Rather than seeking to establish whose rights take precedence in a contest of rights, the question becomes how to act in a network of mutuality where what affects one directly affects all indirectly, like walking on a trampoline.
What a great image. Why is the trampoline such a great image?
Because everybody bounces if one person moves.
That's right. So we are all connected. As an oversimplification, well, one of the great insights of the feminist movement was the following phrase: the personal is political and the political is personal. That is, both politics and our day-to-day relationships use the same currency. The currency is power. How you relate to other countries and how you relate to your life partner both involve the use of power. And when you look at that, you can focus on power and use it in different ways. As an oversimplification, a traditional male way of focusing on power is to be task-oriented. What do I mean by that?
Say it again.
to be task oriented.
And you go from one task to another to complete the task and find something else you need to do.
Leadership means getting things done.
Mhm.
Traditional female leadership tends to be group oriented. What do I mean by that, Speaker Pelosi? I'm sorry. I mean, what do I mean by that?
Women tend to be more networkers and working together as a group.
So this is already an insight that's decades old, and I hope that I mean, I certainly know women who are very focused on task and men who are very nurturing. So this is, at this point, I would say, I hope, a false dichotomy, but traditionally this was the view, and different perspectives. The thing about morality is, if you look at what do I do, that's really one kind of moral question. The question is, what does this mean for us is a different kind of question. So that, I think, is what her insight is here. As a feminist, she criticizes the zero-sum approach of one person always weighing their interests against others. Instead of a zero-sum game, Gilligan proposes a network of mutuality in which we are constantly influencing and being influenced by the decisions of others. This means that how we are doing will have an impact on others and vice versa. The metaphor of the trampoline was a weight on one part will affect the rest. This is also deeply embedded in Jewish tradition. We can talk about the practical implications, but I'm going to move on. The background here, let's look at the Talmud here. This is playing out a specific idea here of this section of the Talmud attempts to answer the question of how to prioritize limited funds for interest-free loans in the Bible or grants by the time of the Talmud. And by the way, are you supposed to help in Jewish tradition the poor in your own city or the poor in the land of Israel? There's a one-word answer to that.
Both.
The answer is yes. Right? So the question is, how do we envision expanding circles of community to whom we're connected? It's interesting. Remember, this is the same tradition in which we celebrate agricultural holidays in which the cycle of the agricultural seasons is based on the land of Israel. That may not be the case in the Southern Hemisphere. It may not even be the case of when the rainy season ends and the dry season begins if you're living in the Virgin Islands. In fact, it's quite not the dry season here during hurricane season. So what does it accomplish by this constant sense of liturgically and ritually and textually having our focus on a land that we don't live in? And Carol, this speaks a little to your question of why Israel. The answer is it connects us vertically through time, horizontally with all Jews everywhere. It brings an expanded sense of what is the circle to which we are connected. It may start in our own congregation, but it says that this is a worldwide community. Again, like the TARDIS, you step into a synagogue, but that synagogue gets bigger on the inside than on the outside, like the TARDIS of Doctor Who. Let's look at this text.
That's fine. That's fine if you have the state of Israel, but what happened? What was the concept prior to 1948?
Disraeli, Benjamin Disraeli, who converted to Catholicism, to Christianity in order to be in the parliament, was once asked by Queen Victoria, "Which are you, Disraeli, the Old Testament or the New?" And he said, "I am, Your Majesty, the blank page in between." He wrote a novel called Tancred, in which he wrote the following words: "The nation that consists in praying for its harvest, even though it has no fields to reap, will indeed someday regain its harvest." So the answer is that the awareness of Israel predates and continues before and into the existence of the modern post-1948 state of Israel. Okay, from the Talmud about lending money. Anyone? I sound like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Anyone? Anyone? Okay.
If you lend my people money, even the poor with you, Exodus 22:24. My people or strangers, my people have precedence. A poor person or a rich one, the poor have precedence. Your poor relatives and the poor of your city, your poor relatives have precedence. The poor of your city and the poor of another city, the poor of your city have precedence.
And then at some point, it's going to introduce the poor in the land of Israel also, as earlier. But this passage offers a prioritization of competing claims on our charitable resources. It does so by suggesting concentric circles of responsibility. The Talmud counsels that if we must choose between Jews or people who are not Jewish, we should choose the Jew. If we must choose between a poor recipient and a wealthy one, we should choose the poor one. In Jewish ethical thought, there is an assumption that greater depth of relationship equals greater ethical obligation. David Hartman of blessed memory called this covenant ethics because it is what is owed people to whom you are in a shared covenant. While this includes higher obligations to fellow Jews, it also looks at many other factors, including family bonds, or it could be, the island you live on, or it could be a shared community as defined in another way. What are the circles of care in your own life besides Jewish ones? Anyone? What are the circles of care in your life?
Well, you mentioned the greater community in which we live. So, the Virgin Islands as a whole, whether you're talking about the Jews in the Virgin Islands or all the people of the Virgin Islands. And some people look at it as, defined by country or maybe defined by some other thing. But I think it starts with family and expands out from there.
How do you articulate a priority list for donations?
So for me, I live on an island too. I'm just very far from yours. And
Aloha.
So, aloha. So for my island, I live in Oahu. For me, it's important because I'm a retired chef for the farmers here, the young farmers who are, trying to grow organic and actually make a living, but also take care of us because, we get hurricanes and tsunamis and wonderful stuff like that. We have, it's called a slow money loan. So I look at them financially and I buy local. And so I look at them as, we're part of a Ohana, that Ohana's family, and they're part of my greater family and I help them financially.
So the circles of care, I think one of the things we've learned from millennials is that labels and choices and binaries is a little more complicated than it used to be. You can be part of many identities at once. I remember, years ago, so are you an American first or a Jew first? Or are you, what is your primary identity? Is it gender or is it, these things are, to borrow a phrase, a little bit fluid sometimes. And younger Jews don't want to say they don't want to wall off necessarily. Many younger Jews will go to Jewish events if they're totally comfortable bringing non-Jewish friends there. In many ways, millennials and those younger than millennials are teaching us that identities can be, multifaceted. And I think that's an important insight. A lot of the Jewish world and its institutions are based on the idea that, this was our primary social connection. This was our primary, it's not anymore. Which complicates that sense of what is the circles and what are the expanding circles of our connection. One of the book's titles that I want to write when I write my own philosophy is I want to call The Second Circle of Faith, which is the idea that, our obligation starts with ourselves. We'll come to that shortly. it expands to, I guess, our family and then our community, however we define it. But no matter where on the road you stop, even Israel, right? No matter where on the road, this is my own personal view, if you stop at any of these circles, it is idolatry. We have to have a sense of expanding circles of connection until it comes to the whole universe. Now, the problem I find with many ultra liberals, even though I lean that way myself, is that they want to start with the entire universe, right? And I am reminded of, this is the balance between universalism and particularism. I am reminded of that line in the old gates of prayer. I could no more speak without using a particular language than I could be spiritual without being rooted in a particular spiritual tradition. That doesn't mean that you don't expand to explore the others, but you have to, you have to dive deep before your wings spread to the entire everything all at once. At least that is my view. So let's read this from Deuteronomy. There's 4 verses here from Deuteronomy, source 3, about the sense of obligations to our own. Go ahead, anybody want to read? Ted, you want to go?
Sure. If there be among you a needy person, one of your kin, within any of your dwelling places in your land, which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your needy kin. You shall surely open your hand to them and lend them sufficient for their need. Beware lest there be
By the way, sorry, I'm going to interrupt. The Talmud expands that a great deal. De machzaro, what is sufficient for their need? If somebody who is used to wealth and comfort becomes poor, there is a tradition in Jewish life that says you keep them maintained in wealth and comfort because that is what their need is. And then there's, of course, a debate about how much is one supposed to give. It's a very interesting debate, which we're not going into now. So keep going. Beware, verse 9.
Beware lest there be a base thought in your heart, saying, the 7th year, the year of remission is at hand, and you be evil to your needy kin and give them nothing, that they cry to the Lord against you, and guilt comes upon you. You shall surely give them, and you shall not be discontented in your giving to them, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all of your actions and all of your undertakings. For the poor shall never cease out of the land. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall surely open your hand to your poor and needy kin in your land.
That's any reactions to that last verse?
Well, it puts the poor before the needy kin.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know if it was meant in that way, but it could have been. But I find it sad to say the poor shall never cease.
Sure,
We're never
yeah.
going to finish this job. On the other hand, it means our obligation continues. The Talmud says in the Pirkei Avot, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It is not incumbent upon you to finish the task. And this is it became a song. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, and then goes on. V'lo ata ben horin lihivatel mimena. Neither are you free to not engage with it. The laws providing material support to the poor in one society are among those reviewed by Moses at the end of the Torah. The Bible obligates us to financially support impoverished kin, here meaning any other Israelite. The text emphasizes how hard this will be. Poverty is never ending, and loans are sometimes unlikely to be paid back. When someone in our community becomes indigent, we are commanded to take care of them. Further, we are commanded not to do so with negativity. According to this principle, the obligation to our own community goes beyond do no harm to requiring us to share our resources with them. I'm going to skip the rest of this. I hinted at the question of what are the limits of our obligation. We're now going to take a verse from Parshat Kedoshim, the Holiness Code. The Holiness Code, Leviticus chapter 19. First, I will ask you, what album is this artwork from? What rock album?
Stairway to heaven.
Stairway to heaven.
Stairway to Heaven. Thank you very much. The two main ideas in Parshat Kedoshim are aspirational. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. And what is this statue?
That's it. Jerusalem, it's love, right?
It's the love statue in Hebrew, Ahava. And so we're encountering that was one of the best known verses in the Hebrew Bible. Who wants to read this? Actually, I didn't capture all of it, but you can figure it out.
I'll read again.
Go ahead.
You shall not hate your fellow in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor. It's supposed to say neighbor and not
neighbor.
sin because of them.
It doesn't mean horse. It doesn't mean neighbor, right? Go ahead.
You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against your fellow citizens. Rather, you shall love your neighbors as yourself. I am the Lord.
Okay, we can spend hours on these two verses. What does it mean to not hate a person in your heart? What has anybody ever successfully rebuked anybody else ever anywhere? Does it get the desired effect, right? How do you do it? What is our obligation? But the scope of the obligation to those in the community, this teaches that obligation to those in need involves more than just opening our wallet. This is one of the most famous passages in the entire Torah. Love your fellow as yourself. Do not hate one's fellow. I'm meant to feel something towards members of my community, not just act towards them in a particular way. Have you ever had to train yourself to feel a certain way about someone? Kendra, I see you nodding, so.
Oh, yes. So many people I wanted to hate and had to force myself not to.
A long time ago, the person I called my uncle, I guess he was the sandak at my bris, said something about art. He said he takes a painting, a poster of a painting that he doesn't like for some reason if he has a negative, and he hangs it up in his room. And he stares at it and over time comes to appreciate it. That just, when you said something, Kendra, I was reminded of that. Anyone else? Have you ever had to train yourself to feel a certain way about someone?
I think we all do. I mean, people we work with, we don't have a choice. I know patients and students, you just have to be very objective and non-judgmental.
Yeah, it's
I think revenge is best served cold. That's my.
Well, we can discuss that in other contexts. The first laws that are given to the Israelite following the Ten Commandments consists of civil laws, the foundations of an ordered society. Oh, we're moving on. We're moving on from that great verse in Exodus to our last text tonight, which I will simply read quickly because we are running out of time. To those of you who joined us at 8 o'clock, we remember we did not change time on the Virgin Islands, so it is now 8:12 here. If you encounter your enemy's ox, or I'll say donkey, wandering, you shall surely bring it back to your enemy. If you see the donkey of the person who hates you lying under its burden, you shall not leave without helping them. The donkey, I think, right? You shall surely release it with them. Now, one of the great point, any reactions to this verse?
I feel for the donkey, but not for the person.
I actually do think that this does mean in its original context, enemy who's within your community. That's unfortunate because it could be a broader moral lesson if it was more so. And interestingly enough, by the way, the same law appears in Deuteronomy, but it says, if you see your brother's enemy or your fellow Israelites, right? Property, you shall return it to him. It's the same law, but in Exodus it says enemy. So the gloss on this, of course, is when you do this, it turns your enemy into your friend. That's nice. I don't know if that's what is originally meant. I think they may have been two separate laws. It's important to understand in this context, the person you're helping is still a member of your community. Their existence places an obligation regardless of your feelings about the person. Also, that the fact that this person is an enemy is a recognition that small acts of kindness can be the first step doesn't have to be, doesn't always work this way. God knows it doesn't, to repairing broken relationships.
By
I
the way,
want to moments in our,
Michael, I'm
Sorry.
not sure that both of those interpretations are lovely. There's another interpretation, which is that by returning your enemy's property, you're actually gaining a certain ascendance over your enemy. It's an instruction manual for how to defeat your enemy.
yes, except you're absolutely correct. It may have meant that originally, but the verse that we read before that from Leviticus is interpreted in the Talmud to deal with do not wrong one another, or do not hate one another in your heart. Do not do something kind in order to gain the moral superiority points and hold it over them. Is dealt with directly in the Talmud. You're correct that it may have been that originally, and you're correct that both of the readings on this page here are a little bit of a stretch from the original verse. So that was a good catch. You may be right about the original context, but at least the Talmud was as aware of that as you are.
I'll take it.
Yeah, you'll take it. Okay. Moments. Yes. Comment? We're about to finish with the screen here, so. Are there moments in our lives which are governed by covenant ethics? When do we go out of our way to mend bridges?
When there's an underlying relationship.
Make it worthwhile.
Yeah, to make it worthwhile, right? The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite
When you
of
need
love
something.
is apathy, right?
Well, also it says mend bridges. If you're going to mend the bridge, it implies you're talking about a place where there was a bridge to begin with.
Right.
So this is to maintain.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
To put this another way, what is the circle of people whose connection to us can survive personal ruptures?
That's a
People
very,
with whom one has a strong bond.
It can be it can be even larger. It can be people with whom we need to interact in order to accomplish things in our lives, whether it's in our personal community, our family, or our work. And we're going to have to deal with those people. And so even if they've done something that we find reprehensible or horrible, we have to find a way to get past that and reconnect with whatever it is about that person that is still allows, some sort of constructive interaction. And sometimes that can grow to forgiveness, and other times it just turns into tolerance.
So you're talking about an instrumental. You're talking about an instrumental or utilitarian move, so it could be repairing relationships could be instrumental or it could be intrinsic. Either one, in the terms that I'm using now. Remind me if you want, we'll come back to abortion, or we'll just skip that altogether. Other comment?
I just wanted to make a comment about enemies and bridges and all of those things. They are very draining to an individual. They take away your positive energy so that you don't have that energy to give to the positive things in your life. So it's almost a duty, I find in my own life, it's almost a duty to get rid of those bad feelings towards people, those feelings of they're being my enemy or whatever, so that I can move on and live and appreciate all the good things.
So I once spent a week with 100 women and my wife approved. I was the scholar in residence for a week at the annual retreat of the Benedictine sisters in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I had there some of the most challenging discussions of my entire life. Among them was the constant emphasis on forgiveness and how the Jewish people collectively should forgive the Nazis. And I just was nauseous. I was just nauseous. And they said
That,
for your own sake to move on. And Marilyn, for exactly it's draining. And there is no question in my mind that psychologically, sometimes Israel reacts to Palestinian provocation in ways which reveal the fact that we are still wounded, that we don't realize that we are a successful first world, stronger country, and that we can't get over the trauma. The sisters were right to that degree in exactly what Marilyn was talking about. You know, you can't yank my chain if I'm not holding on to the other end. But on the other hand, forgive the Nazis. What I finally said to them was, whether I can do that or not is not the point. The point is that in Jewish law, we don't have vicarious forgiveness. I can't go to a priest and get it done for me. The only person who can really grant forgiveness is the person who was actually harmed. And if you kill somebody, I got 6 million reasons why I can't forgive the Nazis, because they're not the people who were 6 million who were killed, never mind other things, aren't around to grant that forgiveness. It's not my role. But so the power of letting go versus the question of justice is very much at play here as it comes out in this question of ethics, as we've discussed. Let's take a quick look at this summary, and then close the shared screen so we can talk to each other. Covenant ethics, according to David Hartman, means prioritization of care to those who are closest to you takes precedence, and that the closer the relationship, the closer the attention required. There is an ethicist who's a philosopher at Princeton. Maybe he retired. I'm forgetting his last name, but his first name is Peter, I think. Anybody know who I'm talking about?
Peter Singer?
Yes, it may be Peter Singer. My brother-in-law, Shelley Kagan, who teaches philosophy at Yale, wrote a book called The Limits of Morality. And Shelley leans a little bit in this direction, although he may pull short towards the end. Shelley's ultimate argument is that you should be ultimately all selfish or all selfish, that the in-between position is not philosophically defensible. It's a very interesting book, The Limits of Morality. I once told him I was waiting for the movie to come out. But by the way, his
Starring Charlie Sheen.
His most popular class at Yale is called Death, and it's available online on the Yale for free on the Yale. You can look at his Death class, and it's a very popular class. But Peter Singer, I think, is correct, is the one who says that our ethical obligation to our own child is no different and no higher than our ethical obligation to a starving child in Botswana. It's a very interesting philosophical position. He's an outlier in that, but he would strongly disagree with covenant ethics. At the end of this night, which I combined 2 classes into, I wanted you to be familiar with the basic distinction between universal ethics, creation ethics, and relationship-based ethics. That should have a dash. Covenant ethics. With Gilligan, you saw the trampoline theory. We all exist in relationships from which we cannot escape. Bava Metzia gives us a rubric for handing out charity, which involves a prioritization for my own community. Deuteronomy 15 and 19 shows strong obligations to members of our own community. And Exodus 23, the obligation is so strong that it even extends to enemies in one's own camp. The next class, if we were to do it, which we aren't, in the ethics series, brings the creation and covenantal ethics into conversation with one another. Now, I have not looked ahead because it was enough to prepare these 2 classes for tonight. But there's one example I can share with you. Is this our last? Yeah, these are our last. I'm going to stop the share altogether. Gallery mode. It is 8:23, so we are closing in on closing. Let me close the participants here. There, you're as large as you can be on my screen. There is an interplay between ethics and morality as it plays out over time. So the question arose in the Mishnah, Binyan shenafal b'Shabbat, a building that collapses on Shabbat. Are you allowed to violate Shabbat in order to desecrate Shabbat in order to save the people who are inside it?
Yes.
Well, the first answer is yes, but not for the reason you think. The reason is yes, because it says that Shabbat, chai bahem, will help us live by them. In other words, you violate one Shabbat so that the people inside are able to celebrate many more Shabbats. Well, what is the immediate implication of that?
They're Jewish.
Correct. So can you imagine the situation we're in now? The building collapses and you go, hey, down there, help. You Jewish?
I am now.
I am now. Exactly. If the guy knew the Mishnah or the woman, that's exactly the response. I am now.
Oi, am I Jewish?
The Talmud realizes that this is an ethically unsustainable position. But it does not have a way within Jewish law to correct it. So it then says, and it introduces an extra legal, a meta legal element. And it says, of course you help anybody. Mipnei darkei shalom, for the sake of peace. Now, what's the problem from a legal point of view with that argument for the sake of peace? The answer is it's not a legal category, right?
Mhm.
It just isn't. It's like a monkey wrench in the system that says we have just come to the wrong conclusion, right? An ethically indefensible conclusion that we can justify your saving the people if they're Jews. You can't stop. You can't leave it at that. We don't have a good legal category for extending it, so we use this sledgehammer on it and say, like in American legal terms, you might say, I smell a rat. That's not really a legal category either, but it is used in legal circles, right?
Right, that's why the law distinguishes between cases of law and cases of equity. I mean, even in the American legal system gets that to some degree. No.
Okay, right. That's yes, I understand what you mean now, right? There's something called the smell test is like, this is just not right. Something's not kosher here. This is an interplay between what we owe each other and what we owe everybody, and it plays out sort of in tension with itself as it comes to the right conclusion, but it takes a while to get there. Friends, we have reached the end of our journey through peoplehood, an introduction anyway, peoplehood, faith, practice, and ethics. This is your chance for comments, thoughts, reactions to the entire journey of this 6 weeks. Rachel, I saw you wave your hand. You may be just scratching your ear. Okay, so anybody who wants to share anything at this point?
But I will just say thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, let's find a way to stay in touch beyond this. And I'm open to suggestions. I got one from one of you by email earlier. Emily, you just came on camera. Does that mean you want to share any thoughts of anything here? What has anybody learned? What has anybody gotten out of this? Emily, you're unmuted.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Oh, sorry. I also wanted to say thank you. I enjoyed my time here. I know I didn't say much, but I've been taking a lot in. So thank you.
This is not a standard introduction to Judaism class, if by that you mean this is how you light Shabbat candles. This is an ideological, conceptual, big idea picture of really some of the important frameworks of Jewish life, how we think about ethical questions, how we think about identity and what makes us Jewish, how we come to spirituality, and what does a life of religious practice mean. Those are the areas we've covered. Any specific reaction, anything from anybody else? If this is your time.
I have two comments, if I could make them really brief. First comment, I have been thinking about the 10 commitments ever since we did them in the first session I attended. I thought that was a very powerful list. And it's one of those things where you can disagree with any one or several, and it's at least a conversation starter. But I really like the concept of, as I understood it, what's the minimal list of things you have to buy into if you want to consider yourself to be Jewish? That's how I read it. I really like that. And the second thing, even briefer, is I really like that idea of praying before studying. You know, I mean, I know that there are a multitude of prayers in traditional Judaism, and there's a prayer for just about everything. But, you know, as a bookish kind of guy, a college professor, the whole idea of let's pray before we study, that really resonated with me. So thank you for introducing me to that experience.
Sure, thank you.
Michael, I was going to say, I would be very happy for a 102 class.
Yeah, I got that
Yes.
from Katina. I got that from Katina earlier. Is Katina still with? Oh, there she is. Katina suggested, we try to pick a, you have the table of contents of all of the volumes. You'll get the ethics one tonight, but remember where I did an overview. I've shown you the table of contents for all of these, or you could look up Foundations for a Thoughtful Judaism online. If there are particular sessions that you guys are interested in, I am juggling some things at the moment, which means I can't tell you exactly when I would schedule this again, but I certainly would love to. I've loved doing this and this time with you, and the study that has, preparation for it has been really very close to my heart. It's meant a lot to me. Anyone else?
Just really appreciate the depth. Just really appreciate the depth and all the time that you put into it, the time and the heart.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
The teacher's guide said that it was should be about 3 hours for each hour session in terms of preparation. Sometimes it was a little more. They didn't necessarily envision doing this on Zoom and with the PowerPoint, so that obviously took extra time, but I'm always glad I did because there we have the record of it.
Well, I've enjoyed much the exchange of ideas with all the people who have participated. And of course, you're guiding us through it. So it's been an interesting experience, and I thank you for doing it. And I think exploring maybe one of the subjects in more depth at some future point would be good. But one of the things that I've always found the most intriguing and compelling about Judaism is the intellectual side of just exploring the meaning of different things and debating it and looking at the different interpretations and then hearing how everybody else responds to that. So thank you.
So this was so different than what I've taught before, and I taught once here in the Virgin Islands with the Garrick Family Foundation support, which is called Taste of Judaism. It's a brief, quick, 3-week-long introduction to God, Torah, and ethics, spirituality, peoplehood, and ethics. It was, God, Torah, and Israel, spirituality, peoplehood, and ethics. So it was a similar kind, but that was meant as a very, very brief taste. This one was a deeper dive, but hopefully, Ellen, it still encourages Judaism for people. There's my commercial for you, and thank you for your support. Thank you for your support and the support of the National Center to Encourage Judaism, which, Marilyn, you should know, has made a contribution to our congregation.
Yay.
I just wanted to thank you very much. I found the classes to be very challenging. And I don't know that I grasp everything in each class. The next time you do it, I'm going to have a notebook. I'm going to take notes like I would have done in a college class, then go back and go through my notes and restudy and rethink the whole thing, because
At least, unlike the other Hartman sessions, I didn't give you homework for this one, right? So you do have from me both the YouTube recording to go back, and but tonight was rushed. I rushed through a lot of material. The basic two ideas were clear: obligations to everyone and obligations to group, right? But there were so many. It was two classes that we smushed together tonight, so that was a fast run tonight.
it was also nice to be with people that I don't necessarily know and to hear what they have to say, people from all over the country and so forth. So that was a great pleasure of mine.
Right, and remember, once upon a time, Kathy in Hawaii would not have had voting rights in the United States, but she does now, so maybe there's hope for all of us. So that's aloha to Kathy.
I want to say the sense of community has been really great for me. It's not a Jewish-friendly island, let's say. But thank you, Rabbi, and everybody else. It's been really wonderful. I hope we can continue it. Also, you all are invited to the Oahu Jew Crew Hanukkah party, as we call it, my house on Saturday, December 4th. I'll put you up. You want to, you know,
Nancy's just a short visit away.
I can almost swim.
That's right. Look out for the sharks.
Okay.
But seriously, you know, 16 of us, good food. I'm making the brisket.
Oh, wow.
It has been a pleasure. Emily, let's touch base about coffee or lunch or dinner. And we'll talk. And take care, everybody. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.